Close your eyes and imagine a city dying. Not the sudden death of natural disaster or the clean obliteration of a single catastrophic event, but a slow murder conducted brick by brick, street by street, soul by soul, over the course of years. Warsaw in the winter of 1944 is not a city anymore. It is a corpse that has not yet stopped twitching, a landscape of rubble and ruin, where buildings stand like broken teeth in a skull, where silence has replaced the normal sounds of urban life, the trams and conversations and laughter, with something heavier, more absolute. This silence has texture, it has weight, it presses against your eardrums like a physical presence, broken only by the occasional crack of distant gunfire, the rumble of German tanks patrolling streets emptied of the 300,000 Jews who once filled them with commerce and culture and the ordinary business of living. You are hiding in the attic of a bombed-out building on Niepodległości Avenue. Your name is Władysław Szpilman. You are 32 years old, though hunger and fear have carved you into something that looks 60, your body reduced to angles and sharp edges, your face a geography of deprivation, where every bone is visible beneath skin stretched tight like parchment over a frame that is slowly consuming itself. You were a pianist, not just any pianist, but one of the finest in Poland, a man whose hands once drew music from a Steinway Grand in the Polish radio studio, whose recordings sold thousands of copies, who wore tailored suits and attended opening nights at the opera, and lived a life that seems now like a fever dream, like something that happened to someone else in a different universe where the laws of physics and human decency still applied. That life ended in September 1939, when the German army rolled into Warsaw, and everything that had seemed permanent, civilization, culture, the basic assumption that educated people do not murder each other over accidents of birth, revealed itself to be as fragile as sheet music in a fire. You watched your city transform. First came the armbands, the white bands with blue stars that marked you as Jewish, that turned you visible in a way that had nothing to do with recognition and everything to do with targeting. Then came the walls, the ghetto boundaries that compressed 400,000 people into an area designed for a tenth that number, that turned the Jewish quarter into a pressure cooker of disease and starvation and despair. Then came the deportations, the cattle cars, the selection process that sorted human beings like merchandise, these to labor camps, those to the gas chambers, mothers torn from children, families dissolved in the space between one breath and the next. You survived the ghetto through a combination of luck and connections and the piano, always the piano. You played in cafes where the Jewish police and the smugglers and the collaborators gathered, played Chopin and Schubert while people ate food bought on the black market and pretended for an hour that they were living in a world that made sense. You played while the deportations continued outside, while the ghetto population shrank from hundreds of thousands to tens of thousands to thousands to hundreds. You played until your family was taken, your mother, your father, your sisters, your brother, loaded onto trains bound for Treblinka, where they would be murdered within hours of arrival, though you did not know this yet, would not know it for certain until after the war, when the full dimensions of the catastrophe became impossible to deny. You escaped the final liquidation of the ghetto in 1943 through chance and the intervention of a Jewish policeman who pulled you from the line of people boarding the trains.
You have been hiding ever since, moving from one ruined building to another, a ghost haunting the wreckage of your own city, surviving on whatever scraps you can find or that are brought to you by the few remaining members of the Polish resistance who risk their lives to keep you alive for reasons that are not entirely clear. Perhaps because you are famous, perhaps because you are a symbol of culture in a place where culture is being systematically exterminated, perhaps simply because helping one person survive gives meaning to their own survival. The cold is the worst part, worse than the hunger, worse than the fear, worse than the crushing loneliness of existing in silence, with no one to talk to, no human contact except the occasional whispered visit from a resistance member who brings a piece of bread or a jar of soup and leaves before their presence can be discovered. The winter of 1944 is brutal, temperatures dropping below freezing for weeks at a time, and you have no heat, no proper clothing, no way to generate warmth except by wrapping yourself in whatever fabric you can find, old curtains, newspapers, rags, and curling into the smallest possible shape to conserve body heat. Your hands, your pianist's hands, that once moved across keys with the precision and grace of a master craftsman, are now cracked and bleeding, the fingers swollen and stiff, possibly frostbitten, though you try not to think about what that means for your future, if you survive, if there is a future, if the concept of after has any meaning in a world that seems to have frozen in perpetual apocalypse. You practice on imaginary keys. This is not metaphor. You actually do this, sitting in the darkness of your hiding place, your hands moving through the motions of Chopin's nocturnes and Debussy's arabesques, your fingers pressing against empty air, your muscle memory performing for an audience of rubble and rats and the ghosts of everyone who used to live in this building before it was destroyed. The music exists now only in your mind, but it is more real than the physical world around you, more substantial than the hunger and cold and fear. The music is proof that you still exist, that you are still human, that something inside you has not been extinguished by the systematic effort to erase you and everyone like you from existence. It is November. The war is turning. You can tell by the sound of artillery, by the way it grows closer each day, by the rumors that filter through your occasional contacts with the resistance. The Soviet army is advancing. The Germans are retreating. Liberation is coming. But liberation is a word that exists in the future, and you exist only in the present, in this moment, in this ruined building, in this body that is failing one system at a time. And then you hear steps.
The footsteps are deliberate, measured, the sound of boots on broken plaster and splintered wood, and they are coming closer. You freeze in your hiding place behind a collapsed section of wall, every muscle in your body locked in a paralysis that is part instinct and part conscious decision, because movement means sound, and sound means discovery, and discovery means death. Your heart hammers against your ribs with such force that you are certain whoever is approaching must hear it, must be able to track you by the percussion of your own terror. The footsteps pause, resume, pause again. Whoever this is, they are searching systematically, methodically, the way soldiers are trained to clear buildings, to find hidden weapons or supplies, or people who have no right to still be breathing. You press yourself deeper into the shadows, making yourself small, making yourself nothing, a trick you have learned over months of hiding. The art of becoming invisible not through camouflage, but through absolute stillness, through the suspension of all the small movements and sounds that mark a space as occupied by the living. You do not blink, you do not swallow, you barely breathe. The cold air moving in and out of your lungs is reduced to the thinnest possible stream, just enough to keep consciousness, not enough to create the fog of condensation that would betray your presence in the freezing air. The footsteps grow louder, closer, and then a figure appears in the doorway of your room, silhouetted against the gray winter light that filters through the building's shattered windows. He is Wehrmacht. You can tell by the uniform, by the distinctive cut of the greatcoat, by the officer's cap, and the way he carries himself with the posture of a man accustomed to authority. He is not young, perhaps 45, perhaps 50, old enough to have fought in the previous war, old enough to have seen things that carved lines into his face that have nothing to do with age. His name, though you do not know it yet, is Wilm Hosenfeld. He is a captain in the Wehrmacht. He has been stationed in Warsaw for years, watching the systematic destruction of a city and its people, and something inside him has broken, or perhaps not broken, but awakened, some capacity for moral clarity that his uniform and his nation and the entire apparatus of Nazi ideology could not quite extinguish. He sees you. There is no point in pretending otherwise. His eyes find you in the shadows with the practiced efficiency of a man who knows how to look, who understands the geometry of hiding places and the small telltale signs, disturbed dust, recent footprints in the rubble, the faint warmth of recently occupied space that mark the difference between abandoned and merely empty. For a long moment, neither of you moves. You are looking at each other across a distance of perhaps 3 meters, but it might as well be 3 light years, so vast is the gulf between your positions in the hierarchy of this war. He is armed, he is fed, he is clothed in warm wool and leather. He represents the power of an empire that controls most of Europe. You are a skeletal figure wrapped in rags, unarmed, starving, representing nothing except the stubborn refusal of life to extinguish itself, even under conditions designed to make extinction inevitable. He speaks. His voice is quiet, controlled, with a quality that is neither threatening nor reassuring, simply factual, as though he is confirming something he already suspected. "You are hiding here," he says in German, not a question, a statement. You understand German. You grew up in Warsaw when it was part of the Russian Empire, studied music in Berlin before the world went mad, speak half a dozen languages because that is what educated people did in the cosmopolitan Europe that existed before nationalism and racial ideology turned the continent into a slaughterhouse. You nod slowly because there is no point in denial, because the evidence of your presence is written in every detail of this space. "You are Jewish," he says, again, not a question. The observation carries no particular emphasis, no emotion that you can detect. It is simply another fact being established, another data point in whatever calculation is happening behind his eyes. You nod again, waiting for what comes next, the shout for reinforcements, the drawn pistol, the execution that would be over in seconds, your body left to freeze in this ruined building until the Soviets arrive and find what remains and add you to the unfathomable count of the dead. But instead, he asks, "Are you alone?" The question surprises you. It implies what? Concern? Curiosity? Or perhaps it is tactical, a way to determine whether there are other fugitives hiding nearby, whether this building conceals a network of resistance fighters, or just one starving pianist who poses no threat to anyone. You nod a third time, and the gesture feels like a confession, like admitting to the most profound loneliness imaginable, not just the absence of other people, but the absence of any connection to the world, any proof that you still belong to the category of human beings, rather than existing in some liminal space between life and death. Hosenfeld, though you still do not know his name, takes a step into the room.
You flinch involuntarily, your body responding to months of conditioning where any approach means danger, means violence, means the end. But he stops, raising one hand in a gesture that is almost gentle, almost apologetic, as though he is trying to calm a frightened animal. I am not going to hurt you, he says, and there is something in his voice now, some quality of weariness or sadness or disgust that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with what he has seen, what he has been part of, what he can no longer pretend not to understand about the nature of the war he is fighting. What is your profession? He asks, and the question is so unexpected, so utterly disconnected from the context of this moment that for several seconds you cannot process it. Profession, as though such a thing still exists, as though you are not just a Jewish fugitive whose very existence is illegal, but a person with skills and history and identity. Your mouth moves, but no sound comes out at first. Your voice, unused for weeks except for the occasional whispered conversation with resistance contacts, has atrophied into something rough and uncertain. Pianist, you finally manage to say, the word emerging as barely more than a whisper. I am a pianist. Something changes in his expression, not quite surprise, but a kind of recognition, as though you have just confirmed something he hoped might be true. He looks around the ruined room, at the debris and broken furniture, and the remnants of what was once someone's home. His eyes settle on something in the corner, an upright piano, incredibly, somehow still standing despite the destruction around it, its wood scratched and scarred, but structurally intact, a piece of furniture that has survived bombardment and abandonment and the collapse of civilization itself. He speaks. Play something.
The request hangs in the air between you like smoke, like something you can almost see taking shape in the frozen space of this ruined room. Play something. The words make no sense. You are starving. You are terrified. You are face to face with a German officer who could end your life with a single word or bullet, and he wants you to play the piano? For a moment you wonder if this is some kind of elaborate cruelty, a sadistic game where he will let you approach the instrument and then shoot you as you reach for the keys, adding the mockery of false hope to the brutality of execution. Or perhaps he is insane. Perhaps the war has broken something in him, and you are dealing with a man whose grip on reality has become as tenuous as your own. But his face shows no signs of madness or cruelty, only a kind of desperate curiosity, a need to confirm something that matters to him in ways you cannot yet understand. You rise slowly from your hiding place, your joints protesting, your legs trembling with weakness and the effort of standing after hours of remaining motionless. Each movement is careful, calculated, because you are still not certain this is not a trap, still waiting for the moment when his patience runs out and the performance ends and you discover the true nature of his intentions. You cross the room toward the piano, each step requiring concentration because your body has forgotten how to move normally, has adapted to the requirements of hiding and stillness and the conservation of every calorie. The piano sits beneath a collapsed section of ceiling, covered in plaster dust and debris that you brush away with hands that shake from more than just cold. The keys are yellowed and several are chipped, but when you press one experimentally, it produces a sound, thin and slightly out of tune, but recognizably musical, recognizably human. You have not touched a real piano in over a year. The last time was in the ghetto, in one of the cafes where you played for people who were already dead but did not know it yet, who danced and ate and pretended that the walls surrounding them were temporary, that this nightmare would end and they would return to their lives, their homes, their futures. You sit on the broken stool in front of the instrument, your fingers hovering over the keys, and for a moment you cannot remember how this works, cannot recall the simple mechanics of music making that were once as natural to you as breathing. Hosenfeld stands behind you, waiting, and his waiting has a quality of infinite patience, as though he understands that what he is asking requires more than technical skill, requires you to reach into a part of yourself that you have kept locked away, because to access it is to feel everything you have been suppressing in order to survive. The grief, the loss, the horror of watching everyone you love disappear into the machinery of extermination. You begin to play. Chopin, the ballad in G minor. The piece rises from the damaged piano like a ghost, like something conjured from memory rather than produced by strings and hammers and wood. Your fingers remember, even though your conscious mind has forgotten, moving through the passages with a muscle memory that transcends thought, that exists in some deeper layer of your being where the war has not yet penetrated. The music fills the ruined room, spills out through broken windows into the devastated street beyond, a sound so incongruous in this landscape of death that it seems to bend reality around it, to create a small pocket of sanity in the midst of madness. You play through the opening, through the lyrical second theme that Chopin marked as dolce, through the cascading runs and the building intensity of the development section. Your hands hurt. The cold has made your fingers stiff, and the frostbite sends jolts of pain through your joints with each note, but you continue because stopping is unthinkable now, because the music has become larger than your pain, larger than your fear, larger than the German officer standing behind you, whose breathing you can hear in the pauses between phrases. You play through tears that you do not remember beginning to cry, that run down your face and drip onto the keys, leaving small marks in the dust. Behind you, Hosenfeld stands completely still. He is listening not just with his ears, but with something deeper, some capacity for recognition that has survived despite years of service to a regime built on the systematic denial of human value. He is hearing in your playing everything that cannot be expressed in words, the loss, the defiance, the stubborn insistence of beauty in the face of annihilation. He is remembering, perhaps, the Germany he knew before the Nazis, the Germany of Goethe and Schiller and Beethoven, the country that produced some of the finest expressions of human culture, before it transformed into a nation dedicated to the industrial production of death. He is confronting in this moment the unbridgeable gap between what his people claim to represent, civilization, order, superiority, and what they have actually become. You finish the piece. The final chord fades into the silence, absorbed by the rubble and the cold air and the vast emptiness of this destroyed city. Your hands remain on the keys for a moment, trembling, before you lower them to your lap. You cannot turn to look at Hosenfeld. You cannot bear to see his face, to discover what your playing has meant to him, or if it has meant anything at all. Perhaps he will thank you politely and then shoot you. Perhaps he will leave and report your location to his superiors. Perhaps he will simply walk away and forget this ever happened, returning to the ordinary duties of occupation, while you return to the ordinary work
of trying not to freeze or starve. But instead, you hear him move, not toward the door, toward you. And when he speaks, his voice is rough with an emotion he is trying and failing to conceal. You must survive, he says. You must live through this. It is not a wish, it is a command, delivered with the authority of an officer, but carrying the urgency of a plea. What is your name? You tell him, Władysław Schippelman. The name feels strange in your mouth, like something that belongs to someone else, someone who existed in a different life, when names meant identity rather than target, when being known was a source of pride rather than mortal danger. He nods slowly, committing it to memory, and then he begins to speak, quickly, efficiently, laying out a plan with the precision of a military operation. He will bring food, blankets. He will come every few days when his duties permit, when he can slip away without arousing suspicion. You must stay hidden. You must not leave this building. The Soviets are coming, weeks away, perhaps a month, and you must survive until they arrive. Why, you ask, and the question encompasses everything. Why is he helping you? Why does he care? Why is he risking his career and possibly his life for a German stranger whose survival means nothing in the grand scheme of this war? Hosenfeld looks at you for a long moment before answering, and when he speaks, his words carry the weight of a confession, of a man acknowledging truths he has tried to avoid. Because I have seen what we have done, he says quietly, and I will not, I cannot participate in it anymore, even if my refusal amounts to nothing more than keeping one man alive. He reaches into his coat and pulls out a loaf of bread, a hard piece of cheese, a small tin of meat. The food is more precious than gold, more valuable than any currency in this economy of starvation. He places it on the piano, carefully, almost reverently, and then he turns to leave. At the doorway he pauses, looking back at you one final time. Keep playing, he says, in your mind, if not on the keys. Promise me you will keep playing. You nod, unable to speak, and he disappears into the rubble-strewn hallway, his footsteps fading into the distance.
The days that follow acquire a rhythm that feels almost like life, almost like the possibility of continuance beyond mere survival. Hosenfeld returns, as promised, appearing in the ruined building with the regularity of a ghost keeping an appointment with the living. He brings food, bread, sometimes jam, once an entire sausage that you divide into portions and ration over days because you cannot trust that there will be more, cannot allow yourself to believe in abundance even when it materializes in front of you. He brings blankets, real wool blankets from Wehrmacht stores that he has somehow diverted from their intended use, and these make the difference between sleep and the half-conscious shivering state that has passed for rest during the coldest nights. But more than the physical gifts, he brings conversation. This surprises you more than anything else, this need he seems to have to talk, to unburden himself to someone who exists outside the normal structures of his military life, someone who can hear his doubts and his shame without the risk of denunciation or court-martial. He tells you about his family, his wife, Anne-Marie, his sons serving somewhere on the Eastern Front where the Wehrmacht is being ground to pieces by the Soviet advance, his daughter safe in Bavaria, far from the apocalypse consuming Poland. He tells you about the letters he writes in his diary, letters to God or perhaps to history,
or perhaps simply to himself, documenting the atrocities he has witnessed, the mass executions and deportations, and the casual cruelty that has become so normalized that most of his fellow officers no longer even notice it. He tells you about the children. This is what breaks his voice when he speaks, what brings moisture to his eyes that he blinks away quickly as though ashamed of the weakness. The Jewish children rounded up from the orphanages and hospitals, loaded onto trucks while German soldiers made jokes and smoked cigarettes and treated the whole operation as routine administrative work. The children who cried for parents who were already dead. The children who were too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to be terrified by the guns and the shouting and the way the adults around them had transformed into something monstrous. Hosenfeld tried to help where he could, slipping food to labor crews, looking the other way when prisoners attempted escape, using his authority to delay deportation orders by hours or days. But these small acts of mercy feel to him like trying to bail out the ocean with a teaspoon while the ship continues to sink. You listen to his confessions and you do not know what to feel. Part of you wants to hate him simply for what he represents, for the uniform he wears and the army he serves, and the nation that has made extermination its primary industrial product. But another part of you recognizes in him something you have seen before, the face of a decent man trapped in indecent times, someone who has spent years trying to reconcile the irreconcilable, to find some way to live with himself while serving a cause he has come to despise. He reminds you of people you knew in the ghetto, Jewish police officers who took the armband and the baton, hoping they could protect their families, hoping they could use their small authority for good, only to discover that collaboration with evil, no matter how well-intentioned, still serves evil's purposes. The artillery grows closer with each passing day. You can hear it now as a constant presence, the deep bass rumble of heavy guns firing from positions that must be only kilometers away. The sound makes the remaining glass in the building's windows vibrate, sends small cascades of plaster dust drifting down from the damaged ceilings. Hosenfeld tells you the Soviets have crossed the Vistula River, that they are advancing through the eastern suburbs of Warsaw, that liberation is now measured in days rather than weeks. But he also tells you that the SS is conducting final purges, executing remaining prisoners and burning documents and destroying evidence of what has been done here. The window for survival is narrowing even as liberation approaches. On what will be his last visit, though neither of you knows this yet, he arrives looking more haggard than usual, his uniform dusty and his face drawn with exhaustion. The Wehrmacht is retreating, he tells you. Orders have come to abandon Warsaw, to fall back to defensive positions west of the city. He will be leaving with his unit within 24 hours. You feel a spike of panic that you try to hide but cannot quite manage. He has become your lifeline, your connection to the world of the living, and the thought of his absence leaves you confronting again the terrible solitude that defined your existence before he found you. He must see something in your face, but he reaches out and grips your shoulder with a firmness that is meant to be reassuring. You will survive this, he says again, with the same commanding tone he used that first day. The Soviets will be here in days. Stay hidden, stay quiet, do not emerge until you are certain they have secured the city. He pulls from his coat a final gift, a piece of paper with an address written in careful script. After the war, he says, if you survive, if I survive, write to this address. My family will know where to find me. You take the paper with hands that shake, not from cold this time, but from the sudden overwhelming weight of what is being offered. Not just the continuation of life, but the possibility of after, the radical notion that there might be a world beyond this one, where you could exist as something other than a hunted animal, where you could find this man again and say the things that cannot be said now in this ruined building, with the sound of artillery in the distance and the smell of smoke drifting through broken windows. Hosenfeld looks at you for a long moment, and you see in his eyes something that might be hope, or might be resignation, or might be the simple acknowledgement that this is goodbye, that the likelihood of both of you surviving the chaos to come is vanishingly small. "Keep playing," he says one final time, and then he turns and walks out of the building and out of your life, his footsteps echoing down the hallway until they fade into the ambient sounds of the dying city. You are alone again, but you are not the same person who was alone before. Something has changed in the fundamental equation of your existence. You have been seen, you have been valued, you have been saved by a man who had every reason to let you die, and no reason except conscience to keep you alive. The food he brought will last perhaps a week if you are careful. The blankets will keep you warm enough to survive the remaining winter nights, and the piece of paper with the address, you fold it carefully and tuck it into the innermost layer of your clothing, against your skin, where it cannot be lost, where it becomes a talisman, a promise, a bridge between this moment and some potential future that you can barely imagine, but must believe in or else surrender to the despair that waits at the edges of every waking thought. The Soviet artillery continues its symphony of destruction. The German army retreats like a tide going out, leaving behind the wreckage of occupation and the evidence of crimes that will take decades to fully document. And you remain in your hiding place, practicing on invisible keys, playing Chopin and Beethoven and Debussy in the theater of your mind, keeping faith with the promise you made to a German officer who chose mercy over murder, and in so doing proved that even in the heart of absolute darkness, the human capacity for goodness has not been completely extinguished. The war is ending, but your story, the story of two men whose lives intersected in the ruins of Warsaw and were forever changed by that intersection, is just beginning.
The Soviets arrive on January 17, 1945. You hear them before you see them, the rumble of tanks, the shouts in Russian, the sporadic gunfire as they clear the last pockets of German resistance. You remain hidden for 2 more days because Hosenfeld's final instruction is carved into your consciousness like a commandment. Do not emerge until you are certain. Certainty is a luxury you cannot afford, but eventually hunger and the silence, a different kind of silence than before, not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of aftermath, drives you from your hiding place into the frozen streets of a city that has been transformed into something unrecognizable. Warsaw is gone. Not damaged, not destroyed, gone. 90% of the buildings have been reduced to rubble, a deliberate act of annihilation ordered by Hitler himself after the failed uprising, a punishment so thorough that it seems designed to erase not just the physical city, but the very memory that such a place ever existed. You walk through streets you have known your entire life and cannot find landmarks, cannot orient yourself because the geometry of the city has been fundamentally rewritten. Where there were apartment blocks, now there are fields of broken brick. Where there were parks and squares, now there are craters filled with frozen water and debris and the occasional corpse that no one has yet bothered to bury. You are found by Soviet soldiers who take you for a civilian refugee, one of thousands emerging from cellars and ruins, ghosts materializing from the wreckage.
They give you soup and bread and direct you to a displaced persons center where Polish authorities are trying to make sense of who survived and who did not, trying to compile lists and reunite families and perform all the administrative tasks that constitute the first fragile steps toward rebuilding civilization. You give them your name, Władysław Spielman, and watch as the clerk's eyes widen slightly. "The pianist?" she asks. "The one from Polish radio?" You nod, and she makes a note, and you realize that somehow, impossibly, your previous life has left traces that survived the war, that you are not just another anonymous survivor, but someone whose absence was noticed, whose return might actually matter. Within weeks, you are back at Polish radio, or what remains of it. The building has been damaged but not destroyed, and there is a piano, not the Steinway you remember, but a serviceable upright, and they ask you to play, to inaugurate the station's return to broadcasting, to provide some symbol of continuity and resilience and the notion that culture can survive even this. You sit at the piano on February 1st, 1945, and you play the same piece you were playing when German bombs interrupted the broadcast in September 1939, Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor. The symmetry is intentional, meaningful, a way of saying that the war was an interruption but not an ending, that the music continued even when it could not be heard, that something essential about human civilization survived the attempt to extinguish it. But you do not feel triumphant. You feel hollow, scooped out, a man going through the motions that used to have meaning but now feel like performance in the worst sense, artificial, disconnected from any genuine emotion. Your family is dead. Everyone you knew from the ghetto is dead. Of the 350,000 Jews who lived in Warsaw before the war, fewer than 200 survived in hiding. You are one of them, and this fact sits on you like a weight that grows heavier with each passing day rather than lighter, because survival without purpose is its own kind of death, a slow suffocation of the spirit that continues long after the body has been preserved. You think about Hosenfeld constantly. You think about the address he gave you, the piece of paper you have kept like a sacred relic. In the chaos of the immediate post-war period, with borders fluid and populations displaced and entire nations trying to reconstitute themselves from fragments, finding one German officer seems impossible, but you have to try. You owe him your life, and the debt feels like a physical thing, like a rope connecting you across the wreckage of Europe, pulling you towards some necessary accounting, some way to transform his act of mercy into something more than a private moment lost to history. You begin to search. You write letters to displacement agencies, to prisoner of war camps, to anyone who might have records of German soldiers captured by the Soviets. The address Hosenfeld gave you leads nowhere. His family has been displaced, scattered by the war's ending, impossible to locate in the vast chaos of defeated Germany. Months pass, years. You rebuild your life as best you can. You play concerts, you record albums, you even marry and have children, constructing a semblance of normalcy over the foundation of trauma that never quite heals. But always, in the background, you are searching for the German officer who saved you, driven by a need that goes beyond gratitude into something more fundamental, the need to bear witness, to ensure that his act of courage is not lost, that someone knows and remembers and can testify to the fact that even in the heart of the Holocaust, individual human choice still mattered. You do not find him. What you find instead, years later, after inquiries that lead through layers of bureaucracy and the Iron Curtain separating East from West, is a record. Wilm Hosenfeld, Wehrmacht captain, captured by Soviet forces in January 1945, sentenced to 25 years hard labor for war crimes, not for what he actually did, which was save lives, but for what his uniform represented, for the collective guilt of an army that participated in atrocities. Sentenced to a labor camp in the Soviet Union, died there in 1952 from injuries sustained during interrogation, as though the exact mechanism of killing matters when the outcome is the same. This knowledge arrives like a blow to the chest, like discovering that the story you have been trying to tell has an ending you cannot accept. Hosenfeld saved you so that you could live, could testify, could tell the world what he did. And you have lived 40 years and counting, while he died in a Soviet prison camp, accused of crimes he abhorred, punished for a uniform he wore while subverting its purposes at every opportunity. The injustice of it is almost unbearable. The man who risked everything to preserve life died unmourned and unrecognized, while you, the one he saved, built a career and a family and a legacy playing the same music that first convinced your life was worth saving. But you do not stop trying. You cannot stop. You write to Israeli authorities, asking them to recognize Hosenfeld as righteous among the nations, the designation given to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. Your request is initially denied. There is not enough documentation, not enough proof, not enough witnesses beyond your own testimony. But you persist, driven by the debt you owe and the story that must be told. You find other people Hosenfeld helped, track them down across continents and decades, assemble their testimonies like pieces of a puzzle that prove what you have known all along, that this man was extraordinary, that his courage deserves recognition, that his death in a Soviet camp does not erase the meaning of his life. In 2009, 65 years after Hosenfeld saved your life, and 52 years after his death, he is posthumously recognized as righteous among the nations. You are not alive to see it. You died in 2000, having spent the last decades of your life writing and speaking and ensuring that the story survived, even if the principles did not. But the recognition happens because you made it happen, because you refused to let his act of mercy disappear into the vast unmarked grave of World War II, because you understood that bearing witness is not optional, that the stories of individual courage in the face of systemic evil are the only things that make history bearable. This is what survival means in the end. Not just the continuation of biological existence, not just the escape from immediate danger, but the long work of meaning-making, of transforming arbitrary survival into something purposeful.